Welcome to parallel session 6 on gender and labor markets. My name is Zahra Siddique and I'll be chairing the session. And the format is similar to other parallel sessions. So there is half an hour for each of 4 different presentations. For each paper, there's going to be a 15-minute presentation. And then this is going to be followed by 5 minutes of comments by a discussant and 10 minutes of Q&A. So without further ado, I would like to invite Maurizio Bussolo, who's going to be presenting wage subsidies to promote female hiring, evidence from Pakistan.
Thank you very much. Can you is it on? Yes. Is it? I don't know. Is it on? Yes. No. It's on. Okay, very good. Thank you very much for the intro. Let me thank you, the organizer, and say that it's my first time in Pakistan, and I'm very glad and I enjoy the Pakistani hospitality. So thank you for that. So I'll present the work, as you see, with several co-authors, and we have been working on this for quite some time. So it's not finished work yet, but we're approximating getting over with that. So the motivation is quite simple. South Asia, among the various difficulties, gender disparity as one that is particularly concerning, that is disparities in labor market participation. In Pakistan, as you can see there, is quite low, less than a quarter of women participate in the labor market, and is one of the lowest in the world. There has been many studies about this, and most of them look at the supply side constraints, education, fertility, and very important social norms, impediment for women to go out and supply their services to the labor market. But what we focus here is more on the demand side. What are there constraints from employer side, and less work has been done on that. Now, the study in particular looks at whether we can shift that constraint, remove that constraint. With a demand-side intervention, we provide a subsidy for hiring, and we work with one of the largest labor, or the largest labor online jobs platform in the country, Rosie PK, which I visited actually yesterday after talking to them almost for 2 years just online, and they obviously offer me a lot of food, and it was nice to meet them finally. It's the largest one, has over 100,000, but even more firms active online, and more than 5 million job seekers. So the research question is simple. What is the impact of a temporary wage subsidy on female hiring? The more interesting question that I want to talk to you about, though, is this one, whether the potential discrimination against women is due to not having familiarity with women at work. Employers just think that women maybe are not such a good employers, such good employees, so I prefer employ men. But after the experience of having worked with the women, with the nudge that we give, maybe they change their mind. So the second question is really whether, because of the experience of working with men, there is a shift in the attitudes of employers, and therefore, even when the subsidy goes away, they retain the workers, and they start hiring more of them. Okay, so we are still examining the results on that, so I don't talk about that too much. All right, so the main finding, in case I go long, you have this, and this is important. Okay, so it's a sample of about more than 1,000 firms that we work on, which have open positions advertisement on the portal, and they don't have in this advertisement state that they want a man or a woman. We will talk about that in your presentation, what that means, much more in detail. One interesting part of this experiment is that we offer a subsidy based on a sort of an auction system, which is this Becker, de Groot, and Marshak mechanism, which asks, I'll talk to you about that in more detail, but is basically try to extract a true level of subsidy that the firms want to receive, minimum to hire a woman, and it comes up to be fairly low, 15%, so it's not a large commitment from us. The rest is paid by the firm. And interestingly, there's a variation around this 15%, and some of it is related to the level of conservative norms that the employer have, and whether the firm has already female employees and therefore has already facilities, etc. These are two potential things that the firm has to change if they have no previous experience and no facilities. So the impact is large, and the likelihood of being hired when you are in the treatment group is 11 percentage points. So it's a very large impact of only a 15% subsidy. And there's some heterogeneity of that, which is even larger for firms that were hiring only men. Okay, so those are the main findings. The contribution to the literature, I'll skip it for the sake of time. Again, the context I mentioned about the Rosie PK, there's not much additional work done on this for now. There's this study that describes a little bit more about what they do. The firms that are on Rosie PK, as well as the employee, are not really representative of the whole population. They tend to be firms a little bit smaller than the average firm, run by somewhat more educated managers, and they tend to be in specific ICT sectors, but they have all sorts of firms, not just ICT firms, okay? And they tend to be very urban concentrated. Similarly, the job seekers tend to be also from urban areas and younger and more educated. But okay, so the research design is as follows. It's a RCT for on the job posting, and the only two eligibility criteria that we have is that there is no gender criteria and the ads to start with, and we cap to 80K, 80,000 rupees, because we didn't know how much subsidy we were needed at the outset, and so we wanted a certain number of firms, and so we had to cap to that level. So we end up with 1,200 firms from a larger sample initially. The intervention is that there's only one arm, and we split this into a control and a treatment group, and the promise that we make to the treatment group is that if you reveal your subsidy level, we will pay for and hire a woman. We will pay 6 months of salary at that level that you reveal for that position. And what is this BDM mechanism? Is basically we ask the firm. Imagine that you were offered a wage subsidy, a share of the salary that you have to pay, and we will pay that for 6 months. What is the lowest level of that subsidy, lowest subsidy percentage you would be willing to accept to hire a woman, right? And then if you say that number and that number is above a random draw, you won't get it. If it's below, you get it. So everyone that says a small number, 0, they will all get it, obviously. But this avoids people to just say, I want 100%, because they probably they won't get it. So that is what makes the mechanism approach the true value for that. And they do a trial run, so they understand what it is, and that's how it goes. So once they win in this mechanism, we inform them, you won, you're going to be receiving the salary if you hire a woman. Okay, the conceptual framework we skip, and let me say maybe one word about this, although I said I don't have results, but it's still maybe interesting to go to tell you something about these social norms. At baseline, we want to figure out what is the level of attitude, social norms towards hiring women, and we have a series of questions. One key question is this one that you have here. We formulate it according to the type of people that are job seekers on that platform, and so we invent this person, Farah, who lives in one of the Pakistan largest city, and she has finished undergraduate studies from a university. She's considering getting a job and is consulting with peers and family about this option. And then we ask, do you agree that she should get a job, strongly agree, you're neutral, etc. So that's one of the key questions. And we ask also about whether men are comfortable to working with women, if women are a distraction in the marketplace. All of these questions are asked to the manager, the hiring manager of the firm. And we don't ask only the opinion of the hiring manager, but we also ask the second order opinion, which is important when you measure social norms. We ask, what do you think the other managers, what do you think the peers think about these things? So the hiring manager answer, I think a woman is a distraction in my workplace, or a woman is not as lower productivity, but also they have to respond, my peer manager also thinks this, or they think, okay, so this is the second order belief. All right, so next year I'll give you the results for this. Let me go through the results. I don't know, am I doing with times? Or 3? I missed the 5.
What's the rationale for the second question?
The second order belief?
The peer.
Oh, that is a very good question, and I can talk to you about this for quite some time. But basically, the basic answer is this: that what you think, your attitudes towards something, don't necessarily have a lot of bearing on your behavior. You can believe that women are not good workers, but it's not necessarily that you act on that. But if you believe everybody that matters in your reference group believe that, the pressure to conform to what is the belief in society or in your reference group is important. So social norms are a social pressure to behave in a certain way, not what you believe is the correct way, but what you think society wants from you. So that's why you want a second order belief. And there's a lot of work that we are doing to measure social norm in South Asia. In Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, we have surveys. Okay, so results. first one is that Becker, the Groth-Marshak system, we obviously did only on the treated group, and not all of them. We have some attrition there, but of those who do it, 80% were below the random draw, so won the subsidy. And the subsidy, I already told you, is fairly low, it's 15%. Note that is actually lower than the unincentivized, because we also asked at baseline how much you want, and everybody said more, 25, about 26%. So when it's incentivized, this also reveals that the power of this mechanism is actually the true is below what they initially wanted. And going to the actual results for the intervention, we have a standard, very simple indicator for the treatment, and our focus is on the beta there. Okay, and we have to control for some differential attrition between the treated and the control. So we use that. So I'm going to the results, and I'm done. Okay, so but I already mentioned this. This is one of the main results, and you have that beta is about 10%. Then in the without control, if you add controls, you get not much differential, which goes to 12 and 11. And then we have the Lee bounds, which is on the last column because of the differential attrition. Okay, so those are the bounds. But everything tells you that is about 10, 11%. Against a mean of 46%, which is a high. We can discuss this. Okay, so it's a very large effect, and so there's some heterogeneity that we have begun to see, and if we focus only on male only firms, is even larger. Okay, the impact, and we did then a treatment on treated, not just the intention to treat that I just showed you, and in the usual way. So we have a first stage that is here, and a second stage which is this one. So the one that actually are in the treatment and actually hire a woman, the impact is even larger than the intention to treat as expected. So I conclude with this, that there is at the outset we weren't sure, but after having done that, we find that this simple policy can have potentially strong impact, and it's large, as I said, especially compared to the level of the subsidy, which is an interesting part of our experiment, to have this auction type revealing mechanism. Now, what we are trying to do is whether, and we are about to finish the collection of data, we want to make sure that this has long-lasting implication, because comes the 6 month, if all the women that were hired get fired, is less of a success. So I can't tell you the retention rate now, but there is a sign that it's not so bad. And I stop there. Thank you very much. Okay, so you ask a couple of questions of external validity, which are questions that you would expect, and of which I have some answer, not perfect, but some answers. All right, so the first issue is on the level of education and the level of income, or let's say we put a condition, which is that the salary shouldn't be above 80K, which is fairly high. And so I have not at the top of my head the the average wage for women in Pakistan or for the whole, but it is fairly high. So I don't think we are absolutely limiting ourselves to the lower end or lower tail of the distribution. Indeed, and the second one is about not advertising with a specific gender request. We have eliminated these two limitations, and we are collecting data on hiring in general, not with the subsidy, from the portal, to see whether the hiring in terms of without this limitation is very different from the hiring that we have when we impose these two limitations, and it's not. So these two limitations, at least in terms of the sample we work with, is very representative of the sample of largest population of Rosie. How the population of Rosie is representative of the population of Pakistan, then no. I agree. Although Rosie has been growing and has been extending its reach, it's not yet the people that operate on that platform are not yet representative of the population at large in Pakistan. But that's in a way is a question that what a lot of governments are dealing with in South Asia, other regions in developing countries, and even in high-income countries, is what is the impact of the digital economy in general. So this economy, the digital technology is expanding, is reaching more and more people. So I'm not. I think it's still an interesting result what we have, even if we operate with the knowledge that we cannot extend immediately to the whole of a population. The second external validity is why you asked me why we chose for Rosie. Well, it's the largest one. They had a very good. We had another team that was working with them. It was very easy to continue working with them. They provided all the data. It was in a way convenience, but again, it's one of the largest. The focus on cost, what I didn't show in details. Obviously, we are not providing subsidies to other costs, such as the facilities. If they don't have a restroom separated by gender, it's a cost for the firm. But when you talk to an employer about employing a woman and what is the subsidy that they want, they may, in the answer, they may, although use finance only the wage, they may think, oh, but I have other costs, so I want a bigger salary. So it's kind of implicitly connected to the subsidy if they have additional costs. So it's not a problem. And indeed, we show, or I didn't, but we have results that the subsidy is larger when they don't have facilities. So that's the relationship. On the BDM, okay, so you were surprised because a lot of firms win the subsidy, which means that they always report a number below the random number, and so. We play with the distribution of the random draw. So you can have a toss of a coin where you basically get or a uniform distribution where with a certain probability that your random number is below 50%, which or above 50%. So if if you use a distribution that is like that, everybody that says above 50% won't ever win, right? But we wanted to have, we didn't reveal what kind of random distribution we had, and we had a fairly generous one, but we wanted to give the incentive to people to know that if they bid very high, they risk not getting it. And that's the whole beauty of the BDM, to provide an incentive to people. Oh, if I say a number that is potentially too high, and the random number that comes up too low, I won't win. If I stay below, so that's what the mechanism is, and it worked fairly well. On the last one was on long-term effect. As I said, we have ongoing hiring follow-up, and then we have which is with the firm, the survey, ask them if they hired and the person is still there. But you also have a women survey, and we ask them. Some of them have left even before the 6 months. Some of them are still there. So we are collecting data directly from the employee, and yes, it would be great to go back and talk to them in a year time. It has been, the attrition has been a problem a little bit. So it takes us many phone calls to talk to the firm and get information from them. So, and these are small firms, they appear, disappear. So the feasibility, practical feasibility of long-term follow-up it's hard, but it's certainly on the radar screen and important. Yes.
Okay, so yes, go ahead. The question. Okay.
Thank you. I'm a little confused about the subsidy part to hire a female in the office, because I haven't really heard that the salaries are even being subsidized to hire a female, because if the job is advertised, it's equal for both male and female. Anyone can apply and get the job. But what normally the female employees would want to have, not a subsidy in the salary, they would look for the facilities at the workplace or the office. Facilities, as you have just mentioned, like a separate toilet, their ability to come and go from home to office, that is a very, very important part in our, the mobility of the female to go to the workplace and come back. And the third, for the female employees who are already married and have minor children, they would want to have a daycare center. So these are some of the very three important facilities that a female would want to have at the workplace. So if there is a subsidy which the employer has to build into hiring a woman, he would have to have these facilities also, which will of course be a subsidy. You call it a subsidy or you call it a cost to have a balance for both male and female employees in the
So
office.
let's collect a few questions, and then Maurizio maybe could respond to all of them. Yes, go ahead.
My question is actually related to the subsidy one, so it makes sense for me to piggyback on that. Increasing female labor force participation rate is good in itself. So if an academic researcher were doing this work, I'd say fantastic. But since 3 of the authors are at the World Bank, I have to ask the next question, which is what kind of job growth in the economy would justify the subsidy? Because if there's a substitution effect in times of stagnant economy, which Pakistan's economy is, how do we justify the subsidy in fiscal terms? Does it pay for itself? And secondly, social norms work both ways, both by the hiring manager, what social norms he or she subscribes to, but also the family from which the work is going to come. Do the female workers' parents or husband, etc., what are their social norms? And what wage differential would convince them that it's worth crossing their social norms? So, something to think about.
So we have just time for one more question. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. So I was wondering what kind of mechanism you kind of had in mind for these results, like what friction you're alleviating with this kind of a subsidy. So for example, like the firm might have training costs for women that are different for men, and then that's a potential friction that you're kind of overcoming. It could just be you're in a bad equilibrium, and to incentivize you to go into a better equilibrium, you're basically providing that subsidy. So in your mind, like what's the mechanism that is driving this effect? Because, you know, like I doubt that women are just inherently less productive in this kind of a setting. So there's some friction that's being overcome here, and I don't know what that is exactly.
So,
Okay.
okay.
All right, very quickly, because we have a little time.
Yeah.
Okay, so, all right. So I said, maybe this is the issue of having 15 minutes to present, because I can't go into all the details. But we, as I said very quickly, we look at the demand side of the story, not the supply side. So obviously, why childcare has to be provided by the demander, by the employer? The childcare should be provided by the government or by, it's not clear that it is a cost of the employer, and it's not clear that the cost should be for women only. The child are of the woman and the man. So it's not so. If you again, as I was answering to her comments, if you think of the cost of employing a woman, not only her salary but everything else, then the firm should ask for a larger subsidy, and so those things are embedded there. Flexibility, time flexibility, also that it should be why should it be a female thing and not a man thing? But a lot of these firms are in ICT business, so they have already some flexibility built in. So it doesn't seem to be that one of the issue for this particular sample. But again, the representative issue is important, and so if these results extending to the whole economy is a bit more difficult. So your point are valid. But we are not looking at what is happening at home from the perspective of the parents of the woman, the in-laws of the woman, the husband, which may, together with the transportation to etc., which are all affecting more the supply side or not the demand side. They are very important. I'm not saying that they are not. They are very important, and we study them a lot. But in this particular study, we look at if I'm an employer, why I'm not employing a woman, and I get to your point. And yes, subsidies are an issue. There's floating around an enormous number in terms of GDP growth of increased female labor force participation. Enormous numbers. The McKinsey talks about almost doubling the GDP of the world if women were. Right. Of what? Of how you come from increasing female labor participation to more GDP. Well, that's another few papers that we have to believe. But
in a low growth.
Yes, no, but there are several mechanisms. Just let me mention two very quickly. One is a simple one-step increase in the factors that are at work. You have more factors at work, but that's a jump in it's not growth effect, but it's a jump. So that's one. the most important, interesting one is the fact that if there's a misallocation of resources, if men participate much more than women, it must be the case that you leave some women at home that shouldn't be at home because they are, if talents are distributed equally between men and women, if you employ more men, you're employing men that are whose productivity is lower than the women that are at home. So if you have a more balanced gender participation, you are employing the most productive ones. So you have an increase in productivity. There are other mechanisms as well, but I don't doubt that 15% subsidy cannot be repaid by more participation of women. I don't doubt, even though my IMF colleagues may have some issues with the fiscal cost of that. Finally, no, there is no, I mean, there are potentially frictions in terms of mobility, social norms, etc. But truly, the employers believe that women perceive women less productive and perceive women disruptive in the workplace. So not only is employing a factor of production that is less productive, but also impact the productivity of other factors. In such a situation, you can show that there may be even corner solution where there are firms that employ 0 women, and so in that situation, starting to provide a subsidy switches this, and that's what we measure. We can talk more offline, but thank you.
Okay, so we're going to move to the third presentation by Fatima, which is Reform Impacts, Analyzing How Merit-Based Medical Admissions have affected medical outcomes in Pakistan.
Okay, get the clicker. All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm presenting joint work with Dr. Hadia Majid, who's here at LUMS. So in this, okay, all right. Take 2. So thanks for being here. I'm presenting joint work with Dr. Hadia Majid here at LUMS. So in this paper, we're studying a really interesting reform that happened in Pakistani medical schools. So before 1992, there was actually a 20% cap on how many women could be in each class of medical schools. I'll talk about why we had this cap in a couple of slides, but basically, the reform itself that we're interested in is that there was this court case filed by a group of applicants to medical schools in the late 1980s, and it was female applicants, and they basically alleged that they were being discriminated against. So even though they were scoring higher than a lot of male applicants, they weren't allowed to get into school because of this 20% cap. Eventually, the courts here in Punjab and then in the rest of Pakistan, they sort of ruled in their favor, and this cap was removed in favor of merit-based admissions. So the first class that could be affected and that got in basically on merit would be the class of 1992, and then they would have graduated in 1997. So anecdotally and in the data, something that we know is that after we switched to merit-based admissions, there was this influx of women in medical schools. This is something that we've read in the newspapers quite a bit. And then also, those women did trickle down to medical specialties. So in almost every medical specialty, we see a changing gender ratio with more female specialists entering the field. And so what we're studying in this paper is how did these changing gender ratios, how did that impact medicine as a whole, right? And what we mean by that is, like, how did that really impact the type of doctor practices that we see and where doctors are working? So those sort of structural changes in medicine. The strategy that we use is going to be difference in differences. And we collect data on 700 doctors here in Pakistan working with Gallup. The strategy basically relies on, there's this before and after of reform, right? So we can look at doctors who graduated before the reform and after the reform. But it also relies on this really interesting cultural feature that we have here, which is that a couple of specialties, they were actually not affected by the reform much, right? One of them is going to be gynecology, which was already at basically 100% women. So basically, there was no real change in gender ratios in gynecology. after the reform. And the same goes for urology, which, again, for cultural reasons, ends up being kind of male-dominated. Okay? So for most of the talk, we're just going to be dealing with gynecology, so I'll just focus on that for now. What do we find? So just a preview of the results. So surprisingly, we find that in treated fields, so that's basically all specialties apart from gynecology, doctors, and especially female doctors, they make less after the reform. So they make less when the field sort of gets more mixed and the gender ratios change. And this is driven mostly by a lot of female doctors charging a very low fee or zero fee per outpatient that they see. Okay? Also kind of surprising was that female doctors, it's not really that basically the fee part is not related to their output because they're seeing at least as many patients or sometimes even more patients than their female counterparts in the control group, which is gynecology. And then perhaps because they're seeing a greater volume of patients, they're spending less time with each patient. So they're basically spending on average about 5 minutes less with each patient that they see. And then finally, the third thing that I'm going to show you guys is kind of connected to the first two, and that's basically that female doctors, they're actually becoming more likely to work in public hospitals. And in fact, there's some suggestive evidence that they're displacing men in smaller public hospitals, and men are sort of moving to larger private hospitals. So what do we make of all this? What are these results telling us? The takeaway to us right now is that even though there was an increase in diversity in these medical specialties, there's still a bit of a segregation in where men and women are working, and that's going to affect things like the gender pay gap between doctors, and it's also going to affect doctor practices, such as who's spending more time with patients and who has sort of like basically things related to the quality of care that's provided. Okay. Okay, so a little bit more about this cap that we had. So the 20% quota on the share of women in medical schools, that was actually around, it started in 1948. And it came about because when Pakistan was created, there was a shortage of female doctors. And so it was decided that we're going to save 20% of medical seats for women, and then the other 80% are going to be for men. But because over time, there was such a demand for going to medical school by women, so a lot of women wanted to go to medical school, that 20% actually ended up becoming a cap or a limit. Okay? Then later on in the 1980s, there was a court case led by Shireen Munir here in Punjab. And again, the applicant sort of, what this group of female applicants, what they said was like, look, like we're being discriminated against. We're actually scoring a lot higher than a lot of male applicants, but we're not allowed to get in. Eventually, the court ruled in their favor, and the cap was removed. And as I mentioned earlier, the first class that entered based on merit would have been the class that entered in 1992 and then graduated in 97. Expected to graduate in 97. Okay. So this graph is actually going to be important for motivating why we think gynecology is a reasonable control group. So here what we've plotted is the pre-reform average female share of doctors in medical specialties, and we've plotted that against the change in female share, right? So this is telling us how many women were already in those specialties, and this is telling us how much did that share grow by, okay? And what we see is this sort of like upward sloping line, which tells us that the fields that tended to already have a lot of women before the reform, that's where we saw the most growth, right? So dermatology, for example, dermatology had a lot of women. It also saw an increase, a greater increase in the female share of doctors, maybe because there's something about dermatology that makes it an attractive specialty for women, right? Now, one outlier that we have here is gynecology. And as you can see, gynecology was basically almost 100% women before the reform. And that's why we think there wasn't a lot of room for the gender ratios to actually change in gynecology, right? So it was saturated by female doctors, and so you couldn't really see much of a change in the gender ratio there. Okay, so that's why we're basically going to end up using that as a control group while the gender ratios change in all the other specialties. Okay, so we have a very simple difference in differences strategy. We're going to have treated, so that's again all the specialties apart from gynecology, post as if you graduated after the reform. We're going to have specialty group fixed effects, which basically means we're grouping the smaller specialties into one group, and then we're controlling for the other specialties. We control for age and the square of age, because things like income are going to vary with your age. We also have graduation year fixed effects, survey round fixed effects. And then we also do sort of a variation of this strategy. So something that's interesting about what's happening here is that even the doctors, so if I was a doctor who graduated before the reform, but I'm still working, I am still being exposed to the treatment, right? Because I'm still around when the gender ratios are changing. And so instead of just using treated times post, we also do treated times the share of your career that you've spent since after the reform, right? So it's like, how long has your exposure been? With this idea that if your entire career has been spent after the reform, you're treated very heavily. But if like half of your career is after the reform, then maybe you're not treated as much, right? Yeah.
So the cap is for like all medical professionals, not for professionals in one specific field.
Okay, so the cap was actually at the medical school level. So it's like to get into medical school, and there is no cap that we know of at the specialty level. So you could still choose specialty. Okay. Okay, so again, we collected 2 rounds of data. About 700 doctors. We worked with Gallup. We started with a random sample of the names of doctors that we got from the Pakistan Medical and Dental Council's website, and then we randomly sampled a few, gave them to Gallup. We did oversample gynecologists and urologists so that we would have enough in the control group. Yeah.
You said that it's a before and after the beta 1, but it's a triple difference because you also have the gynecology.
Okay, so here the treated, okay, so I should clarify this, treated is basically non-gynecology.
Okay.
Yeah, so that is what okay, so thank you for the question.
Okay, I got it.
Yeah, so you're treated if you are not in gynecology, you're not treated if you are in gynecology, so.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so something that I want to show really quickly is basically, people might be concerned about selection effects. So once, of course, like the choice to pick your field, like that you decide what field you're going to go into, and so people might be concerned that after the reform, who's going into which field, like that's going to change. And so we did collect some data on background characteristics, such as like your secondary school score, middle school score, mother's education, and so on. And something that we see is, again, not treated here, that relates to gynecology, right? And treated is basically everything that's not gynecology. And we see that actually those background characteristics, there isn't much of a change, especially in terms of ability. And so that's, it doesn't completely take away the concern, but it mitigates it because at least observably, selection into gynecology is not changing that much. Okay, now moving on to the results. So I think the table might be a bit small, but I'm going to talk through everything. So what we have here is, this table is going to tell us that there's a decrease in the pay for female doctors, and it's primarily driven by female doctors being more likely to charge a 0 fee. Okay, so in the top panel, I have the results for everyone, and the bottom panel for female doctors. So basically, what we're doing is we're comparing female non-gynecologists to gynecologists, which is the control group. Okay? In the first 3 columns, I have data on everyone in our sample, and the doctors that we collected data on, the oldest one graduated in 1971, and the most recent one in 2023. Now, because that's a very broad sample, for most of the analysis, we do restrict the data to people who graduated within 10 years of the reform, so 10 years before and 10 years after. And in the last 3 columns here, I have the full set of fixed effects and controls in our regression. And what we see here is that basically female doctors especially are a lot more likely to charge a very low or 0 fee for the patients that they're seeing. And that in column 9, like even when we account for their take-home salary, so when we account for everyone has like a base salary and then they charge a fee for patients. So even when we account for their salary and the number of patients that they're seeing, they still are actually making less money than their female counterparts in the control group. Okay. This is sort of event studies because it's a difference in differences design. I'm going to go a little bit fast through those. But okay, and I'll get through the results first. Okay, so here we have the results for the number of patients that they were seeing and the time spent with each patient. In column In column 4, we see female doctors are seeing 18 more patients per week on average. Okay? And then once we include the full set of controls, that does become a bit more noisy, so it's not estimated as well, but the size actually remains around 18 patients again, so there's suggestive evidence that they're seeing more patients, and they're spending less time with each patient, so 0.92 here, that's equivalent to about 5 fewer minutes per patient. Okay? So both of those might be connected, like maybe because they're not increasing the number of hours they work overall, but they're seeing more patients, they're just spending less time with each patient. Okay. Again, event studies. And then finally, this is the third finding that I mentioned earlier. So here we have the type of hospital that they're working at. Okay, so we have things like urban hospital, large hospital, and then public hospital. And then what we see is that doctors overall are more likely to work at public hospitals by 30 percentage points, about 30 percentage points. And this effect is actually twice as large for female doctors. So a lot of that first effect seems to be coming from female doctors. Why do we think that's happening? We think, so this is kind of like an open area in our paper right now, and we're still brainstorming different ideas, but we have some thoughts and we have some guesses. And right now we're thinking maybe it's because public hospitals, they tend to have kind of very secure and stable jobs, and they might be sort of less, the hours might be a bit more controlled than sort of at a large private hospital, which can be a bit more competitive as well. Yeah. The last thing that I want to show you is, we also looked at, so we also sort of just said, okay, let's forget about gynecology for now. Let's just look at those fields where the gender ratio is changing, right? So the treated fields. And let's look at male versus female doctors in those fields. Okay? So how are they doing after the reform? And what we see is, so here this is sort of female times post, so it's just tracking, it's female doctors relative to male doctors after the reform. It's not that female doctors necessarily started off at public hospitals, because when we look at where they did their house job, which is kind of like the first job that they do, they're actually more likely to have done their house job in private hospitals, right? It's just when we observe them right now, like where they end up right now, they seem to be more likely to work at smaller public hospitals. So it's not necessarily that's where they started off, it's kind of that's where they are now, and that's where they ended up. And again, we think this might be because there's something about public hospitals and smaller public hospitals that might make it easier for women to work there. Okay, okay. And then I mentioned using the career share spent post-reform. I won't get into this too much, but mostly our results do go through when we use that strategy as well. Okay. So to conclude, what are we doing in this paper? So we're studying a reform that changed the gender ratios in medicine. We find that medical doctors who graduated after the reform in treated fields or fields where the gender ratio changed, they're more likely to charge no fee, and that affects the overall pay that they have and how much money they take home. They spend less time with patients, and they see more patients on average. And then finally, they're more likely to work in public hospitals. What do we think? This is just like a small set of the total number of outcomes we actually have in our survey. But what we think the story is going to be is that even though diversity increased in these fields, there's still segregation in where people are working, right? So I guess like the analogy in economics would be, we see more female economists, but then female economists tend to work sort of in teaching schools, and male economists do all the research jobs. And eventually that kind of segregation, that affects the gender pay gap within the field. It also affects the quality of work, and it affects work practices, such as, in this case, how many patients you're seeing and how much time you spend with each. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll just very quickly go over comments. I thought it was very interesting work. And of course, I guess I'm biased because I work in this field, but of course addressing a very important question, and specifically looking at gender disparities in a highly competitive environment. And one of the things that I was thinking about is that, you're talking about different subfields. I think it would be really nice to have a lot more kind of detail about the different subfields. What are the different kind of, for instance, earnings in different subfields? I'm just thinking about whether, surgery is something which is particularly lucrative, and women face a lot of barriers in entering some of those subfields. which could be because of discrimination, or it could be because they require longer hours, and therefore women choose not to go into those. But I think earnings information by subfield would also be like really interesting, because that would, of course, allow one to connect directly to gender wage gaps as well. And yes, I think it is interesting that, you know, after the reform, that women are kind of, these additional female doctors, they're kind of report being more burnt out, and then, you know, working maybe not in as, you know, more like in public, not in the private sector. So it again kind of makes me wonder if there is some kind of a barrier like discrimination that women particularly face, female doctors face, in entering certain subfields within medicine, I think, which could be explored further potentially. In the draft, you do mention, because I think there were some questions about discrimination, customer discrimination, and so on. I think that would be interesting to talk about more, but I think the worry over there could be that exposed women might just, you know, I mean, how, you know, would their beliefs about discrimination ex post be high if they just have not been able to, or is it actual discrimination that they face? Or I think those are the kind of arguments you might also face. So I think those questions need to be kind of clarified, and maybe other stuff explored, the institutional details added, and so on. So I think that would be really nice. And then I was also wondering, you choose this sample of individuals, but you have this whole database, the PMDC, I think, database of doctors over a very long period of time. So I was wondering, why not use that data? Because that is, I think, the population of all registered doctors, because that would give you a really big data set to work with, and you could, you know, maybe the set of outcomes is not what you elicit in the survey, but that would be also something really nice to do. And you could potentially also, I think, compare your sample with that overall database to see how representative the sample is. And in terms of work-life balance, I was also wondering whether women just report being more burnt out because they have more childcare and household responsibilities. So maybe it makes sense to ask a whole set of questions about all of those different things from women. And another thing that I noted was that in several of the results tables, in which, you know, you're running regressions on different outcomes across different columns, the number of observations does vary quite a lot. So I was wondering if they were like missing observations on some outcomes. And because it did seem to indicate that quite a big fraction was missing. So whether it's missing at random or not. And of course, you know, you could run further robustness checks as well for the different designs, and maybe have a placebo experiment, and so on. And yes, so I think, as I said earlier, having also more information on earnings and salaries by different subfields, by public versus private, would also be like really interesting to include, because, and then kind of linking that to the gender pay gaps in medicine. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. So very interesting paper. Thank you. My question is a bit unfair, but I do it anyway. The basic focus that you have is to compare before and after, as you said, the difference in difference, and therefore it seems to be focused on the impact on the medical profession, the doctors themselves. And as you show, the outcomes are about whether they charge fees or etc. But the question is, I was wondering if you can say something about the overall impact for the society, or for the users of the doctors. And it seems to me obvious that if a sector is so concentrated in having just 80% of just men, there must be some misallocation. Some women must be better than those men star. So I don't know if you have any suggestion of that. And in fact, a little bit in the beginning of your paper, you say that how this reform changes the medical profession, and so it kind of begs the question. Okay, so what is in it for society? If you can even only speculate on that, it would be useful. Thank you.
Any other questions from the audience? Yes.
Thank you so much. I'll talk from a practical point of view. My wife is a doctor, and she's an anesthesiologist. So she's not a gynecologist. My observation, I've been with her for 45 years. We've been married, and a lot of people who are doctors are known to us, and we interact with them and everything. The female doctors, one, of course, I would have liked you to tell us that how many of the female doctors, after becoming doctors, do not do any job, especially after they get married. Secondly, they tend to choose the field where the emergencies are not, they have to go to the emergency. So you will see them, a lot of them in dermatology, you will see a lot of them in radiology, all those kind of fields where they do not have to, except of course for the major specialty, which is the gynecology. Surgery, yes, there is a definite bias. You're absolutely right. There is no top female surgeon that I've heard of. They're all male gynecologists. But they're starting to, like we have, my wife also runs a private hospital in Lahore. I don't know if you've heard about it. It's in DHA. It's called National Hospital. It's in DHA right here, not too far from here. They have now started to receive a lot of doctors in the fields that traditionally the female doctors were not there, like surgery and all those things. Thank you.
Yeah.
Before starting my question, I will add into the information of Professor Saif that the first general lady doctor at this time in Pakistan is surgeon, and she is the first one. She chose in army. She is the first general lady doctor. Just I noted it from the information in the papers also. I think she's a surgeon.
No. Okay. She's known as the Surgeon General because the post in army is known as Surgeon General.
So, thank you. So my question is that in papers we see that round about 8 lakh students, not students but postgraduates, are going out of country. How many lady doctors, FCPS lady doctors, are included in this figure? Number 2, how many FCPS doctors are qualifying in Pakistan, males, boys and girls? You have that data, then that will be more informative for us.
Ji, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Fatima. That was a fantastic presentation. Really excited for your data set. I think that you can answer a lot of really interesting questions as you continue your research into this data set. 2 ideas in that vein for things that you might like to look at given your data. The first is other things that happened around and after 92 in particular. So the privating of the mushrooming of the private medical institutions, I think that might have a gender impact particularly, and that would be interesting to examine. And then the second is to just control, even in your existing research, to control for geography. Because I think that, disaggregating by where the institutions are located and doing some smaller sample studies might actually be quite interesting. And one of the reasons I say that is because you pointed to the importance of small public hospitals as as one of the important. I think it was where the doctors are located.
Yeah.
I think that is related to geography as well. So where those hospitals are, whether or not they're in the major cities or in the smaller cities. So that's for your existing research, perhaps one more idea, and then the other, the private institutions is for more things that you might like to look at. Thank you again.
Okay, Fatima, maybe you could respond to the different comments, and we can move it just in the interest of time. Okay.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for your comments. Thanks for the comments and questions. Okay, so I'll start with. I guess I'll start from the end. So the mushrooming of the private sector, that's definitely true, and I think there is going to be a gender effect there. So we'll definitely look into that. Controlling for geography, that also makes sense. Right now, we've just looked at the likelihood of working at urban hospitals. And in general, it is true that women are way more likely to work in urban places. But I think we can go into like finer geographic detail there. Okay, how many female doctors are going abroad, and how many FCPS male versus female doctors do we have? So we don't have data on how many female doctors are going abroad. Anecdotally, I do think there are more male doctors because generally the brain drain is associated more with men than with women. But I think that might change over time as well. And often, sometimes doctors go together as a couple as well, so that could also, affect the brain drain for women. How many FCPS male-female doctors do we have? I don't have that here, but we do have that data, so I think we could calculate that. Yeah, definitely in medical schools, we're seeing a lot more female, especially in urban places, we're seeing more female students. And then we'll see what the graduation rate is. That's something I think we could find. Okay, which % don't do a job after they get married? Okay, so this is an important question, and I think it comes up pretty much every time. It is true that, I don't have the percentage here, but it is true that male doctors, there's more retention for male doctors than for female doctors. I think that's true in medicine, in many other contexts. But I do think that we need female doctors as long as we have female patients. And in our context, female patients tend to be more comfortable with female doctors. So I think we need female doctors. And once we start from there, I think it's, in terms of policy, it's sort of, how can we improve retention for female doctors, right? So it could be things like just helping them manage the double burden of their time. So, how can they sort of, there was an online platform where doctors could consult from their house. That would be something that could help with retention and stuff. So retention is a huge issue, and but given the fact that female doctors are so important, I think there's scope there for more work and more. Okay, so impact on patients. So that again is another $1-million question. Something that we can say is that after the reform, because admissions became more competitive, at least the test taking, ability based on test scores, that should go up, and we actually see that in the data. So the doctors were smarter, so to speak, at least in terms of how good they are at taking tests. That could have an effect on, how good they are at diagnosing things, for example, and how quickly they diagnose things. We don't have patient outcomes because already with the kinds of questions you were asking about test scores and ability, some of the respondents were getting a bit, why are you asking us this? And so if we ask them, how many patients, how do the patients do, or how many patients come back, and how many survive, or how many lawsuits do you get? That would be another thing that I was very interested in, is are female doctors more likely to get sued than male doctors, for example? But it's very hard as researchers to collect that data. Hospitals have that data, so if we find someone, hopefully we can get at that as well. Okay, and then, okay, so thank you for your comments. Should I go through these, or
perhaps you can discuss later, or if there is a quick response.
Okay, so I think, so the placebo experiment, that makes sense. That's something we should look at. One thing that I wanted to say was, So we actually did start with the list of PMDC doctors. They don't have all the outcomes that we would like. And then we randomly sampled from that list, and we actually gave 10 times as many, the names of 10 times as many doctors. It's just it's sometimes hard to locate the doctors and then get them to actually finish the survey. That also is why we ended up having some missing observations for different questions, because sometimes doctors would be like, you know, I have to go or something. But so I think, so the other suggestions that you have about connecting it to earnings in subfields, that's very doable, and I think we can definitely do that. And, thank you so much. And
you're welcome. I'm just going to quickly move to my own presentation, which is the last one. Let me just get the clicker.
Oh, the clicker is right here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. So, so the title of my talk is Words Matter, Gender, Jobs and Applicant Behavior, which is based on joint work with Sugat Chaturvedi and Kanika Mahajan. And this is very much in the spirit of the other presentations within this session. But I should mention this is actually using a data set from India. So we're using a data set from the Indian labor market in this particular paper. And you know, in the spirit of the session, basically what the motivation behind this work is to look at gender disparities in labor market outcomes such as wages, okay? But what we do is that we're looking at a very initial stage of the labor market, and this is a point at which men and women are making applications for jobs. Now, what can happen is that, you know, women might end up applying to jobs which pay lower wages in comparison to men who have the same qualifications for many different reasons. Firstly, it could be because there could be discrimination or stereotypes about the kind of job roles which are considered suitable for women. Unfortunately, a lot of the job roles which are considered suitable for women tend to pay less. Okay, so if women make applications decisions based on this, then you know we would have this gender wage gap at the application stage. Another reason is often what people have documented is that women are actually willing to pay for flexibility, okay, for job flexibility, and often these jobs also pay less, so that could also result in this kind of gender pay gap at the application stage. So what we do is we study these kind of questions by using data from, again, a job search portal, but this is an Indian job search portal. And we not only have data on job advertisements that were put on this portal over a particular time period, but also we have information on all applications made by men and women to these different job ads. Okay, so this really allows us to study the role that is played by the wording in job ads in where men and women are applying, and of course how this wording plays its role in this gender wage gap at the application stage of the labor market. Now, one of the things, I apologize for the font size, it's like, but basically what I will be talking about very quickly in the presentation is what we look at is, you know, the fact that employers often, when they write job advertisements, they will often, in developing countries, not of course in European countries or the US, but in developing countries, they will often put in the job title or job description that they want a female for a job or they want a male for a job. So these two job advertisements are reproduced from a different paper. This is not from our data set. But you can see that these are both job advertisements for which post jobs in India. And the one on the left is for an executive assistant. And you can see over here that in the job description, they say applied candidate female only. On the other job advertisement, you know, the job title is saying IT executive male. So you can see that there is a very explicit kind of a gender preference which is there within these job advertisements. Okay, and again, unfortunately, what happens is that, you know, you find both the female and preferences for hiring female workers and preferences for hiring male workers. But often when, you know, there's a preference for hiring women, those are the jobs that pay less. So this means that when women tend to apply to these jobs, you start observing this gender wage gap in applications. So this is what we're going to study. Is something we study in this paper. I'm not going to talk about the contributions in the interest of time. So in terms of the data, as I said already, we're using data on job advertisements that are posted on an Indian job portal between 2018 and 2020. And this particular portal is a little bit specific. It targets young urban job seekers who have a university education in India. Okay, now employers, actually one of the nice things about this particular job portal data set is the fact that you can observe offered wages in a substantial fraction of the job ads that these employers are posting. So for 87% of them, you can observe the offered salary range, okay, which is something that we employ. And so we have data on 6.45 million applications, which were made by about 1.06 million job seekers, okay, and this is in response to about 160,000 job advertisements. Now we categorize these job advertisements into 3 different groups. Some of these job advertisements have an explicit female preference. We call these F jobs. Then some of these job advertisements have an explicit male preference, similar to the examples that I showed earlier. We call these M jobs. But most of the job ads actually don't have any gender preference. These are the N jobs. So it's about almost 8% of the job ads actually have an explicit gender preference in this data set. Okay, and almost equal fraction have an explicit female preference or an explicit male preference. Now we also, what we do is we also construct many different measures using text analysis methods. So one of the things that we do is that we construct, what is the occupation. Now we want to disaggregate occupation that a job advertisement kind of falls into. So we use a couple of different methods on the job titles of a particular job ad, okay, and this allows us to arrive at kind of really disaggregate occupation categories, which we use in the regression analysis. And we use 2 different methods. The results don't really change much, on which method one uses. Just a few quick descriptives on the data set. For the job ads, 51% of the jobs require at least a college education. 67% require less than 1 year of experience, and the average offered wage is about 213,000 Indian rupees per annum, okay? In terms of, so these are obviously kind of high-skill jobs, right? If you compare it to nationally representative samples, which we do in the paper. So these are high-skill jobs which are offering substantially high wages than an average Indian worker would be earning. Applicants also are much more highly educated than an average Indian worker. So average job seeker, of course, is also 24 years old. So this is again because this job portal is specifically for younger, younger job seekers who just graduated out of university. 86% have a university degree and 35% are women. So we often get this comment about 35% being women. Generally, you would, if you look at portal data from China or any other country, you would have 50%, but this is not unusual because India, like Pakistan, has a very low female labor force participation rate. So actually 35% is not so bad if you compare the labor force participation rates of men and women. As I said, these are high-skill jobs. So we have done a comparison with nationally representative kind of labor force survey data for India. The posted wages are 21% higher compared to what you would find in this kind of a representative sample. Now what we also do is we, using again text analysis methods, we construct these measures of implicit femaleness and maleness. Okay, what are these measures? These are actually telling us the probability that there is an explicit female request conditional on what the job text is, or there is an explicit male request conditional on the job text. So basically the idea is that is the wording in the job ad, is it more predictive of an explicit female preference or an explicit male preference? So as I mentioned already, we have some job ads which have explicit female or explicit male preference, but there's a large fraction of them which don't have that kind of an explicit gender preference. But for these, the wording can sometimes be, even when the explicit preference is not there, the wording can be actually highly predictive of a male or female preference, okay? These are constructed using a multinomial logistic regression classifier, using all of the job ad text, so the job title as well as the job description, and the results we get are like very really consistent with what you would imagine. So for instance, you know, we have high implicit femaleness for job ads which have titles such as beautician, personal secretary, school teacher. This is what you would imagine. And then we have high implicit maleness for job advertisements which have titles such as cargo loader, delivery executive, network engineer. And because we use both the job description and job title to get these measures of implicit maleness and femaleness, what we actually find is that you know, even if you have the same title for two different job ads, but the description varies in a certain way, then these measures of implicit maleness and females are quite different. So for instance, we have two job ads which are for a sales executive. And in one of these job ads, there's an emphasis in the job description of appearance and communication skills. So it has a high implicit femaleness. In that case, the text is highly predictive of a female preference by the employer. Whereas, you know, when you have again a job ad with the title of sales executive, but it requires a lot of field work, then that job ad has a high implicit maleness. Okay, so I'm not going to go into the tables of results. I'm just in the interest of time, just very quickly, yes.
So that classifier, like I'm wondering if, so say like there's a job ad, and they didn't mention that beautician is for females, that is also signaling something, right? So perhaps by not signaling the fact that that job is for female, there's actually a higher likelihood of that being a male, basically looking for a male, right? Because that's also a decision that they're making to not include that identifier.
Yes, it is possible. It is possible. I'm just going to quickly go over the results, and maybe we can talk in more detail later about that case. Okay, so basically what I mentioned earlier is the fact that, you know, what we observe is that you have these explicit gender requests, and a particularly explicit request for female workers in the low-wage jobs, okay? And also what we find is that more women apply to those particular jobs. And in fact, this is not only the case for these explicit preferences, but also in terms of the implicit measures that we constructed for the jobs that don't have any explicit preference. So all of this basically tells us that, you know, this kind of wording is contributing to a gender wage gap at the application stage. Okay, so basically what we do is we do a standard wage decomposition. We do find that, you know, so there is a 3.5% gender wage gap in the data set. Most of it is explained by the fact that men and women are applying to different occupations and locations, but about 7% is explained by explicit gender requests, and about 17% is explained by explicit gender requests and implicit gender associations. And then I only have 1 minute left, and this is quite a bit. So what I'm going to do is very, very quickly, we also wanted to kind of dig a bit deeper and kind of take a look at what are the specific words which are leading to this high implicit femaleness and maleness. Okay, so we use another algorithm from text analysis methods, which is the LIME algorithm, and that allows us to pick out words which are making the most, which are contributing to the most to that classification decision. We can actually, when we look at that list of words, we can put it into different categories like hard skills, personality, and so on. And it's very interesting. If you actually look at these lists of words, you have some words, of course, which are kind of more predictive of a female preference. And so you can see in this first list, things like beautician kind of related words, or related to accounting, or kind of basic computer processing are more predictive of female preferences, whereas more kind of IT related are related to male preferences. More like finance, they're again related to male preferences, and then kind of manual repair. And then if you look at things which we categorize as soft skills, it's very interesting because you can see the kind of the difference they show up using these kind of automatic kind of text analysis methods. So, you have for women, what are the words which are predictive? It's more like coordinate, accommodate, convince. Whereas if you look at for men, it's more like, pitching to a client, negotiate, persuade. So it's like it's very interesting. Also, if you look at personality related words, it's again, smiling, patient, polite, pleasant. It's coming up to be more predictive of women, whereas for men, it's more like energetic, pressure, enthusiastic, and so on. So we believe that these words kind of, even though we haven't, of course, done in-depth surveys or experiments, we believe these are capturing kind of underlying stereotypes, gender stereotypes of recruiters who are writing these particular job ads. Okay, now another sort of very important words that we found are quite important are like those related to job flexibility. So for instance, working from home or the ability to use Skype is very predictive of a female preference, whereas, kind of traveling a lot and so on is more predictive of a male preference. And then I'm not going to go into details of these results or the robustness checks, just going to, okay, so I'm going to skip all that. But what we find in the regression analysis is that there are two different things which are quite important in these different categories of words that we look at. So for instance, words which are predictive of a female preference and which we categorize as hard skills related words, they actually are associated with low wages, and more women apply to jobs which have those kinds of words. And then also flexibility related words are quite important. So words which are more predictive of a male preference and which indicate less flexibility actually are associated with high wages. So, less flex. So for instance, a job that has a lot of travel requirement or working on weekend, that's actually going to pay more money, and fewer women apply to those jobs. So those particular ones are quite important. Then in the paper, what we do is we also look at not only kind of words which are predictive of a gender preference, but also kind of looking at all words and seeing, what are the kind of words you have in a job ad to which more women send their applications. And over here, you find something quite interesting that, for instance, if you have words like punctual, smile, and pleasant, remember these were like more predictive of a female preference by an employer. But actually, if you have these words in a job ad, fewer women apply to those ads. So we believe that this also connects with the literature in social psychology, which is basically saying that, some of these stereotypes can be quite distorted or inaccurate. Okay, they might be based on actual, like small differences, but they are distortions. So we find that women actually are not responding to these words in the way that employees might anticipate. Okay, now just very quickly the conclusion. What we're finding in this work is that young, skilled women in the urban Indian labor market apply to low-wage jobs than comparable men. I've already talked about the results from the wage decomposition, and as I mentioned already, gendered words which are related to hard skills and job flexibility we find are particularly important. Now this is very important. I've talked about the contribution to the gender wage gap at the application stage, but there are recent papers suggesting that this gender wage gap in applications could explain as much as 73% of the residual gender gap in realized starting wages. Okay, so this gap at the application stage is in fact quite important. And finally, an important kind of a point to make, of course, is that we're looking at this data for young job seekers who are just graduating out of university. And this is an early career stage for these job seekers, and this is likely to then have important cumulative effects over their working lifetime. So, so yeah, that's also something important to keep in mind. Okay, that's it. Thanks. Okay, so it's Maurizio's.
I have a presentation.
Okay.
Sorry. So, how do I? Where is it? Okay. So, I stay here. Probably it's easier. So, no, thank you very much. I want to make justice, and you didn't make it justice yourself by doing it so quickly. But it's a very interesting paper. I suggest everybody to go and read the paper. So I have a. Is it okay? It's fine. All right, good. All right, so for the sake of time, I don't summarize, but I go straightly to the comments. Okay, so I think I made a mistake. You get to a 3.5% of the gap at advertisement stage. It would be useful. My first comment is that it would be useful to compare this. You did now, but I didn't find it in the paper.
It's in the appendix.
To the actual, it's in the appendix that I did. So I said I didn't make justice to all the paper, but to compare this at ad stage to the real world wage gap, and it's 75%. So you already included my comments in the paper, but more generally. Also, something else like that would be useful to have some more comparison. There was also today, I think, mentioned this, that you only have 8% that have explicit gender preference in your data set. In my data set, it's 30%.
Yes.
So there is variation, and we don't know what determines that variation.
I can provide a quick answer to that. Basically, I think you're talking about the rosie.pk data set. So what we found from reading all the different papers that have looked into this is that if you have a job portal that has a separate field in which an employer can actually give their gender preference, that makes the difference. Rosie does have that field.
So it's a design issue.
Yes, so the portal that we use doesn't have that.
I see. Okay.
So we use,
No, but it's useful. So it may be a design issue, it may be a cultural issue. So when this kind of studies is more generalized across the world, we may learn things about discrimination in different cultures, etc. So it's an interesting thing. Your decomposition, which is quite interesting as well. You end up, if I got it right, that your explicit gender choice, the preference, explicit, explain 7% of that gap. So 7% of 3.5 should be, 3.7, I made a mistake there, but it's about 0.3%. And when you put together the explicit and the implicit, you get to up to 17% of the 3.7%, which is about 0.06%. So they are interesting, but are they? First of all, I did the calculation correct, I hope. But are these large? And how do we interpret them? Do we interpret them that they don't seem really large when you look at the overall gap, right?
Yes.
So we could by small nudges, we could probably get the firms to pay equal wages. So that's where I kind of going. But the other question that remained unanswered, at least when I read it, was what is beyond the 70%? What is the remaining gap explained by?
Occupations and location.
And you had explained in your so that's great. Okay. So I didn't see it in the paper. So the last two comments I had were. I mean, this is just a presentational issue. You can choose whatever you want, but you go through the paper with the explicit and implicit, then some regression, the decomposition, and then you go back to the words important. So I was wondering why not moving the words and then have all the analysis or regression analysis afterwards, because anyway, these regressions 4.1 and 4.2, if you have to read the paper, are very similar to the ones. So it seems easier perhaps to read it, but it's just, I mean, it's a presentational issue. You do whatever you think is best. And the final point I had was that yeah, you said that these are at advertisement, at hiring stage, but they don't reflect necessarily what actually happened when they got the job. And that is important because it's not immediately obvious that these lower wage ads are transform themselves into actual discrimination in the job place, right? And because we don't know, in the end, we don't know whether a man or a woman apply. So you don't have that final match, right? So we are implying that, and there is a relationship clearly, but you can't really, it's not final proof for that. And then I show that, and we were talking about the resume audit, and there are cases where, and that's an example there, where you don't have that discrimination in some cases. So but again, very interesting paper. I really invite everybody to read all the papers. Actually, they were very great sessions.
Thanks so much for the comments. A lot of it is of course the data constraints. We wish we had data on, callbacks, complete callbacks, and starting wages, but we don't have that. We have data on application decisions, so that would be ideal. There are some recent papers that have used kind of European data, more historical, when you did observe these kind of gender preferences in job ads, which have more complete data, but yeah, so that's not something we can do with this.
No, I understand.
Yeah. So I know it's way over time, but if there's any questions from the audience, I'm happy to also, yes.
I noted that all the three of you have not mentioned the transgenders quota in jobs and in other fields. Transgenders were missing in your, say, all discussions.
If I may, I can respond. No, I think that is extremely important. There is just so little data, at least for our case. I know that it is, yeah. I mean, that if you look at, for instance, if you just look at survey data sets, a lot of the survey data sets or the job portal data, they're only maybe now starting to add these categories or, kind of talk about these things. So existing data is not there. So I think there's going to be potentially a lot more work happening on that, but maybe in a few years' time. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so thanks a lot for all of your feedback.
Thank you so much.
Okay.